Okay, time to get to the CEO view, and we're joined by 5 very special corporates on this leg of the discussion. Rajan Mittal of Bharti Enterprises joins us straight from Washington. Nanalal Kidwai as well of HSBC India and former FICCI president also joins us from Washington. Both of them are part of the Indian delegation that's travelling with the finance minister. Mukesh Aghi, president of the US-India Business Council, knows a thing or two about bilateral ties between the two countries. He also joins us from Washington, D.C. And we've got Vindi Banga, someone who understands the mood of corporate foreign investors, former board member of Unilever and currently partner at Clayton, De Beer and Rice. He joins us from London. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw of Biocon also joins us from Bangalore. She just returned from the US yesterday. Nana, I'm going to start with you because you've been travelling with the finance minister. What's the response that his roadshow is getting from American corporates and investors?
Well, if you look at what has been a very successful couple of days in New York and now in Washington, pretty much every corporate worth its name has been in closed-door sessions, either one-on-one with the finance minister or in some of the meetings which we at FICCI have been hosting. And the response has been very, very positive because I think people really want to believe the India story. There's nervousness around it. There's nervousness around, well, will India deliver even today? But given the change in government, given the change in the politics of India, the fact that we do have a government with majority in the lower house, people do believe that there is something that's different, something that merits a relook. And some of the frustrations of dealing in the country are being given the benefit of doubt.
All right, being given the benefit of doubt. Rajan, do you get that same sense as well? Has the finance minister managed to woo the American investors, something that he set out to do in his 10-day trip?
You know, we've been with the finance minister for the last 4 days between New York and Washington. Investors have met the finance minister with their issues that they have raised, in particularly some issues which have been the past legacy that the finance minister has been very able to address, articulated that things of the past need to be resolved through a mechanism which is already put in place. But the good part is that he's assured the investors that going forward in future, no such issues will crop up. And I think the investors have felt comfortable. They've spoken to the Indian investors, the Indian delegation, which is along with the finance minister, as how things have changed since the last 1 year. So my feel is that the meetings that we've had since last 4 days, the investors are much more relaxed, comforted that this government means business, this government means to facilitate the investors coming from the US.
All right, this government means business and it has also opened the floodgates to FDI. Mukesh, what's the response that American corporations are giving to the finance minister during his US roadshow? I know he's met a whole host of people, Lloyd Blankfein, he's met GE, he's met a lot of private equity people. What is the kind of response he's getting at this stage?
I would say it's positive for a couple of reasons. One is when you look at the track record for the last 12 months, what we're seeing is government managing its budgets very well. Moody's rating moving it from stable to positive send a very right message. More important is some of the reforms on the insurance side, on the coal and mining side are going in the right direction. I think investors are looking to see that the GST and the labor reforms take place. So I think overall the sentiment is positive.
Rajan Mittal, you said that some of these foreign investors raised a few key issues in their meeting with the finance minister. What were the key issues that were raised and how were they addressed by the government? I'm guessing a lot of the talk must have been on tax.
Two issues primarily came in. One was the issues which were based on the legacy, as I said, on the taxation issues. That has been much put to rest, I have to say, the way finance minister has assured the investors that those issues will not be raised again. Second issues are really on the ease of doing business, because when the investors come in, the first thing that they look at is how quickly they can set up the shop in the country. So finance minister has also put a mechanism to say that how we are cutting the processes, making it more business friendly, investor friendly. So these were two major issues which has been addressed by the finance minister.
Kiran, you're just back from the US as well. What's the mood among American companies, American investors as far as India is concerned? Has their view really changed over the last 12 months from a lot of euphoria to a slightly more cautious, nuanced view?
You know, I think the US investors are certainly, more realistic than what we are here in this country in terms of not expecting the reforms to happen at such a fast pace. But having said that, I think the message is very clear. Investors are very prepared to wait a little longer, but the words I heard being expressed over and over again was they want predictability, they want stability, and they want clarity in our policies and various reforms processes. They do not want any nasty surprises. And I think they have made it very clear that they're willing to be a bit patient, but they want to see strong reforms and they want to see stable, predictable reforms. And I think certainly measures such as the whole challenge we have on taxation and other policy issues is something they are going to watch very carefully. Finance Minister Jaitley has clearly assured them that there would be no more tax terrorism. He has basically promised them that reforms will start rolling out in the near future. And I think investors are waiting to see whether all this will happen. So I think they want us to walk the talk. Basically, they like the talk, but they want us to walk the talk.
I think you've really hit the nail on its head, so to say. They like the talk, but they now want us to walk the talk. Nainalal Kidwai, you've been with the finance minister now. Why is it that money is still not breaking ground? Why is it that foreign investment is not really coming to India, despite all that has been said about ease of doing business, a more liberal FDI regime in the last 12 months? Even the FII flows, for that matter, have actually moderated.
So we've seen a lot of interest from large investors. If you look at some of the areas where the engagement is starting, in defense, in fact, the limits on foreign investment went up really quite recently, in insurance likewise, and there's still clarification pending, for example, in the insurance area on what is the definition of Indian management control. So as these clarifications come, and it's very important that the regulator and those that are framing these regulations and policies on the back of the policy announcements that have been made by the government do this quickly, because it's when this clarification emerges that you'll actually see the deals happen. So I think it is a question of time. These deals are very much in the making, and I have no doubt that in insurance, many of the foreign players will up their stakes. In defense, we will see deals, and in fact, in a number of new sectors where there is interest, we will continue to see fresh investment.
All right, so we'll perhaps see fresh investment comes into new sectors, scaling up of investments in the old sector. But what's really holding back corporates, Mukesh, at this stage? Why are people not scaling up investments in sectors and in companies where they're already invested?
I don't think so, because, India interest rate don't impact us. The US interest rates are, capital is cheap. I think what people are saying is let's wait and watch also on the policy side, on the taxation side, on the predictability on the what I call as the policy process side. And I think those pictures are getting more and more clear. So you will see in year 2 more investment coming through.
Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, when will we see foreign investments flow in? Despite liberalized FDI regime, we've seen FDI caps raised across several sectors, and yet we haven't seen foreign money flow into the country. I'm talking about the long-term money. What's holding them back, according to you?
Like I said, I think we are still not very clear about certain policies. For instance, you talk about FDI. What about FDI in retail? I mean, we are still not clear about these policies. We have made policy decisions in terms of in the insurance sector and a few other sectors. But there are still some, uncertainties or concerns around even these policies. So I think there is a need for clear, articulate, rollout of any new policies, because I think ambiguity is what, investors are really, really concerned about. They want clarity and simple, policies that they can relate to, because I think one of our biggest problems in India has been the ambiguity and the interpretation that is left very often to the discretion of the policy makers, and this is something that we cannot really afford anymore.
How do you explain this, Mr. Banga? We've seen FDI caps hiked in a few sectors, insurance, defense as well, and yet global companies are not really increasing their investment in India. What do you explain this?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that the moves that have happened so far in terms of further liberalization are not breakthrough. I mean, the insurance reform has been expected and talked about for 5, 6, 7 years. And as far as the defense reform is concerned, I still think we have to wait to see how effective it's going to be. Because effectively, I'm not sure how many foreign companies are going to come and invest when they're allowed 49% equity. Are they going to bring technology or not? So I'm not sure whether the reforms that have happened thus far, the new reforms, are really breakthrough enough to bring new sectors in a big way. I think the second issue is that global companies are really concerned about the inconsistency of our tax regime, and they will wait to see clarity on that.
All right, so they will wait to see clarity on some of those things. Mukesh Aghi, what is it that you're picking up from American Inc.? Do you believe the government has been able to provide enough clarity on crucial issues like taxation that have been the big bones of contention in the recent past?
Well, I say there's an improvement in clarity. Is that enough? I would say no. The way the MAT issue was handled from the FIA was a total disaster, especially, I call a market perception disaster. So I think government has learned its lesson, and I think they've reacted to it. They're moving in the right direction. I think a lot of clarity has come through when the finance minister has met with the US IBC members here in New York, and what we're seeing is a process of providing more and more transparency towards the process of making decisions also.
Kiran, that's a valid point that Mukesh and even Mr. Banga made there, that the foreign investors do not like unambiguity. They do not like anything ambiguous. They want simple, unambiguous tax laws. They want predictability. But what is really dissuading the domestic corporates back home here in India? Is it lack of confidence in the government so far? Is it overcapacities? Just to be the devil's advocate, something that the government keeps saying, stretched balance sheets. I mean, why are they not parking with their money right now?
Whether it's foreign investment or Indian domestic investment, I think really it is about very poor infrastructure. I think if you really want those big buck investments in India, you have to create good, robust infrastructure. Today I'm afraid we just don't have that. And until we get those various infrastructure projects off the ground and really start implementing strong transportation networks, until we get our power, situation in order, I think once you get that kind of investment infrastructure in good shape, I think you will see investments pouring in.
Right. But what about Indian companies? Rajan Mittal, you represent one of the largest conglomerates in India. Despite all this euphoria in corporate India, we haven't seen large Indian corporates get into investment mode yet. Why is that?
Two issues. One is partially correct what you're saying, but Indians have started an investment, if you see in the renewables, power sector, mining sector, and of course manufacturing. Services is playing its own role. You're seeing much more investments coming in the services side. It's taking shape. More to do also with this is the really rate of interest that we are seeing that needs to be a little more comfort zone to be brought in. Once that happens, and we have seen 3 rate cuts already taken shape by the RBI, we are all hoping that one more event of that kind could happen. So it's not that the Indian investments is not coming. It has started moving in. You can say that it is trickling in, but we will start seeing this impact probably in this year.
We will see the impact this year, says Rajan Mittal. Nana, you, as a banker, you have a pulse on the mood of corporate India. You have an idea when they're going to really start investing. What's your sense? Why aren't large corporations investing? Why are they still in a bit of a wait-and-watch mode? Why hasn't the investment cycle revived yet?
Indian companies in investment mode is something which I believe is in the offing. One of the reasons, and the main reason why this has not happened, is Indian companies invested about 3 or 4 years ago in the belief that the Indian government would be growing at 8, or India would be growing at 8 to 10%. And that promise, of course, was not fulfilled. So capacity utilizations sit on an average at around 75%. And until capacity begins to get filled, you will not see the next cycle of investment. But creating consumer demand, creating demand from supply chains, ensuring that companies' capacities get utilized is very important. And for that, we need exports to pick up, which have been disappointing. And we need consumer demand, which we also could help with low interest rates and inflation being kept under check.
That's an important point that you raised there, consumer demand, which has taken a hit in a very long time in India. Kiran, I'm going to come to you. Do you believe the cost of credit in India is too high? And just to quote the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian, who said in Washington that the real interest rate is whoppingly high in India for corporates to manage their stressed balance sheets. So the question really is, should Governor Rajan relent on rates, especially since inflation seems to be largely under control?
Well, I think there is expectation on the part of corporate India to lower credit rates, but I think there is also a big concern that there are huge, debts and, non-performing assets. And I think that's where I think the banks are also stressed. And I think RBI is trying to play a balancing game between the two. And I think, I am quite optimistic that the rates will come down now that a lot of the other metrics are much more favorable towards a rate cut.
Fair point indeed. The clamour for the rate cut is only going to grow from India Inc. But of course banks have to deal with their own NPAs. Findi Baga, do you believe the cost of credit is high in India? I know a lot of the transmission hasn't happened yet. But what's your stand really on RBI's hawkish interest reigning in policy? Should there be growth warriors instead?
Well, I think interest rates in India have begun to come down. They've come down by 50 basis points this year. My understanding is that we have not yet seen the full effect of that in lending rates as available to individual companies or consumers. And I think I would like to see that reduction in the RBI rate being reflected fully to the individual user of credit first. I think the second thing is the RBI has said that they want to balance inflation and growth, but they're also looking for measures from the government, for example, to take action on fiscal deficit and reforms. Now, fiscal deficit, I think one of the things that we'd expected the government to do, they talked about minimum governance, and privatization was supposed to be a big action. Now, we're 1 year through. The government, I think, could move to privatize some of the assets that it really should not own. And I think that could be a further stimuli for the Reserve Bank to cut rates.
Rajan Mittal, I'm sure you'd desperately like to see more sharper rate cuts. Despite the kind of cuts that we've seen in inflation, do you think the central bank has been very conservative by not cutting rates more aggressively?
We also have to understand inflation was at a high of like 11%. So RBI regulators have also to ensure that the inflations are in check. Today we see inflation about 5%. And if you see on the consumer price index, it's even better. So I think RBI governor was in his statement said he will want to watch how the monsoons play out. While I don't think so, the monsoons are doing well. We have enough stocks. It's not that it's going to run out, but I think It's an approach which is a balanced approach. We all hope that something post the monsoons should come around.
Nana, are you going to be that diplomatic as Rajan, who seems to believe that the governor's stance has been more balanced? That's not the sense one gets while speaking to corporate India. Do you believe the central bank has been a tad too hawkish?
So the moderation in inflation is a recent phenomenon, and we have seen the central bank actually respond to that as promised in terms of cutting interest rates. What has been more disappointing is the transmission of lower interest rates not coming through the banks. Because if we can generate more consumer demand through, EMIs looking cheaper for individuals, and the money that people have in their pockets, both because inflation has come down, which RBI has been very, very hawkish on and has actually followed very closely, and as interest rates also begin to come off for the customer, you may see much more consumer demand building, which is what India needs to grow. The issue really has been as urban demand has not gone up, even while rural demand has dropped off quite steeply. And we need that balancing to come back. I think we will see rural demand again come back a bit if the monsoons are strong. We've seen the support prices being raised again, so it puts a little more money in rural hands. We've seen promise again of the rural employment scheme being again put through with a lot more features in there. And so all of this should help at the rural front, even while we look at urban demand returning as well.
All right, talking about urban demand and rural demand and cost of credit and all of that, the one big theme of this government and something that they've tom-tommed for a while now is really the Make in India, which is a pet project. Mukesh Aghi, do you believe there's been an enabling environment that's been created around it? I mean, how are American companies really reading into this? Are there enough enabling policies in place for them to come here, make in India?
Well, I think Make in India means you got to have right labor policy, you got to have right land acquisition policy, you got to have, I call, lower local interest rates, and I think government is making effort to go in that direction much more. And what we need to do is ensure that we keep on encouraging U.S. companies to keep on looking and investing more in that direction. Are we there 100%? No. But I think the direction is right.
Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, I'm going to ask you a very candid question. Some of the things that are required for Make in India to be successful is uniform taxation like a GST, which many people believe will be a game changer, or even the land acquisition bill. That's really the starting point for any investments. Those have been stalled because of the political standoff. The inability for the government to draw a consensus on reforms like this. In your conversation with all those people in the United States, is that something that bothers foreign investors?
I think GST is certainly something that we should push through, and I think that is something that the government is confident of pushing through. I think land reforms is required. It might take a little longer, but I don't think that's deterring the foreign investment. I really think it's really about how we go about spelling out our policies. And as I said, one of the biggest detriments to investment has been our very, very ambiguous tax regimen. And I don't think, any investor would like unpredictability in these kind of areas. I think that's something very, very real, and we have to face it head on. Also SEZs, there are a lot of low-hanging fruits. SEZs are one area where, you can actually unlock that potential. But once again, you have introduced MAT after rolling out the SEZ policy, and this government has not been able to roll it back.
Rajan Mittal, do you think the government's legislative agenda, which is just so critical, reforms like GST, the land bill, do you think it will continue to be stonewalled by the opposition, and how much of an impact could this have on the reform process?
India is a democracy, is a noisy democracy, large democracy, and in the 13 months that we have seen, government has done a commendable job in bringing the opposition parties onto the table. Insurance bill, which was stuck for 17 years, has been brought to that is been cleared, because I think the government is talking to the opposition. We are seeing other reforms. Biggest reform that is yet to take shape is the GST. which has gone to the select committees. And I think for India, GST is very important. And we are hoping, and we will play our part as part of being Indians first and then the corporate world, to bring around people to say GST is good for India. It can add, economists say, 1 to 2% of the GDP. That's a one big ticket reform which is really pending on the legislative side. Many of the other issues are executive decisions, and government has been very bold enough to do certain of the executive decisions.
I'm getting a lot of politically correct answers from our CEOs in Washington. Wendy Banga, let me throw it to you. Is there a growing realization then that big reforms like GST or the land bill for that matter, which are game changers, which is what corporate India need, will be held hostage to this political standoff? And is this inability to reach a consensus a big slip on the part of the NDA government, you think?
Well, I think, we must recognize that the government has a majority in the lower house, but not in the upper house. And you do need both to actually get purposeful legislation through. This is a reality of our constitution. Now, in this situation, these are reforms, particularly GST, which everybody is in agreement with. Because it's been on the anvil for 10 years, all parties are generally in agreement with this. I think the way to do this would be to try and create a win-win, to find compromises and keep an 80-20 situation. If you get 80% through, that's fine. We should move forward, I hope.
All right, so we've addressed the reforms that have been stalled, but let's also address the big point of concern, that's ease of doing business. The government has been talking a lot about it. It's ambitiously said that it wants to move from 142 in a list of 181 to a 50. Mukesh Aghi, has there been any improvement on the ground just yet?
I would say some. A lot needs to be done. I think ease of doing business is a lot to do with perception, and definitely on the reality side. When you're ranked 140 out of 189 economies, what happens is it kind of sends a wrong message. So that's where USIBC is working with World Bank to see how we can work within the state and do state-by-state ranking and make sure the perception changes also.
All right, let's just move away for a minute from foreign investments and infrastructure and all of that. And Wendy Banga, I know you've had exposure to this. You understand the rural economy. There's been a sagging rural slowdown, and it doesn't seem to get spoken of in the same breath as the gaping infrastructure deficit or foreign investments for that matter. But it has dented demand, hasn't it?
I think the rural slowdown has definitely dented demand. I mean, you only have to look at the various FMCG companies or companies that sell tractors or agricultural products or other products to see that it's dented demand. But I think, as I said earlier, it has an effect across the whole economy. And we would be well served to take note and actually focus on immediate actions, short-term actions that can help people dependent on the agricultural economy.
Comments from our panelist, Mukesh Aghi. Trade between India and US currently stands at a little over $100 billion. What are the key sectors where there's scope for bilateral trade to go up? What were the sectors that were talked about a lot in your conversation with the finance minister yesterday?
Well, I believe multiple sectors. When you look at, obviously on the agriculture side, we see that moving up. From an India perspective, more outsourcing, offshoring has a lot of potential. We look at the energy side, digital economy side, on the manufacturing side, and very much on the defense side, which is growing one of the fastest. So I think the scope is not about $100+ billion trade. I think we have to take it up to $500 billion in the next few years, and to me that's going to be a definition of success.
Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, let you have the last word. It's been, 13 months since this government has been in office. Would you concede that its performance has fallen short of the very high expectations that corporate India had from Prime Minister Modi and from this government?
So, I think the government had set its expectations very high, and I think it realized it very quickly that it was not going to be able to roll it out at the pace at which people were expecting it. But I think, having said that, the second year is a time when they will have to basically roll out, these policies at a much faster pace, or else, then the confidence will certainly begin to wane.
Kiran Shah, Mukesh Aghi, Rajan Mittal, Naina Kidwai, and Vindi Banga. Thank you so much for joining in with that leg of the discussion. That's the CEO view on the India pitch as the finance minister tries on hard tells the India story. How are corporates reading into all the talk? That's the view from corporates both in India and America. Supriya?
Time to get you the finance minister's view, because he believes India is a bright spot in troubled times and the government is doing all it can to lay out the red carpet for foreign investors. He's also not a big believer in the big bang reforms, instead wants to throw his weight behind incremental creativity. In exclusive conversation with Sadanand Dume of the American Enterprise Institute, we get you Finance Minister jointly.